It is now recorded.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Insider. Now, normally I give a big introduction to the guest I'm going to have on the show, explaining what they've done, but everyone listening will already know. So I'll just say how lucky we are to be able to spend the next 30 minutes in the company of Teller. Thank you for taking the time out, Teller. How are you today?
I'm fine. You know, it's a strange world we're living in, but I'm adapting to it. What I hear from all of my professional magician friends is that this is the time they've always been looking forward to for developing new material. So that's the way that Penn's and my focus has gone. We've done that, and then we've done two. So far, we've done two from home broadcast television specials. One of which will be on, I want to say the 26th. I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure you can find that out from Glenn. And those are sort of interesting to do too. You know, to suddenly have a masked camera crew in my house, and, you know, keeping social distancing from my cameraman, and doing them essentially with only props that happen to either be around the house or can be ordered and dropped off in boxes. So it's a strange world, but I think it's a good time to remember that in one's life, in the course of one's life, a single year is a very small amount of time. One of the things that I think I've learned over the last probably 50 years is that when you're it's just starting out in magic, you think, well, I've got to be really good in a month, and that's just not true. In any enterprise that you're in, 3 years is a small amount of time. You know, if you're sort of budget 3 years to be able to get even a foothold in the occupation. And so now we have what looks to me like a year or a year and a half where live theater performance is going to be very, very difficult to arrange. And I think we just sort of got to say, okay, so that's the way it'll be for a while, and learn to accept that and do the best we can with it. You know, right now for us, we have a considerable size organization that right now we're keeping afloat with the savings of the company, but it's a tricky thing.
So are you taking the time that you've got now to work on new things? Because one of the things that impresses me about your show is how you're constantly bringing in new material. So are you taking this time to work on even more new material?
Yeah.
And can you explain what the rundown is? What's the process for bringing in new stuff? Because I know the Red Bull took an awfully long time. Is there a process?
There is a process. It is, however, not linear. It generally, the way it works with Penn and me is we get together for tea. Sometimes he'll have coffee. And nowadays our get-togethers are via Zoom because we're keeping as strict quarantine as we possibly can, because if either of us gets really sick, the chances of us dying is pretty high. And if either of us dies, that means the other guy's out of a job. And it also means that 15 other people are out of jobs. So it's even more important for us not to take lightly the idea that we've got to be super, super, super careful. So we have conversations, and the conversations go like any conversation you've ever had, which is each person brings something different to the conversation. Very often something that we have read in the news will come up, and we'll talk about that for a while. I remember reading that when Alfred Hitchcock would work with writers, they'd be very frustrated because they'd sit down with Hitchcock, and the first hour would be chit-chat about travel and food and drink, and then eventually they'd come to the item in question, the scene that was to be discussed, and they'd get that out of the way in 5 or 10 minutes after having talked about food and wine for an hour. It's not quite that extreme with Penn and me, but we really do start by just having a conversation. And then as it goes on, either Penn or I will say something like, Penn might say, I have this idea that I think is sort of that I've got a good clear theme on this, but I'm not sure we've got a trick for it. Or I'll come to him and I'll say, we could adapt the idea of billet reading to passwords.
Okay.
What could we do with that? And it's so irregular. There just isn't a formula for how it works. It's just a conversation that's been going on for 45 years and that winds in and out of the practical and stage worthy. A lot of it is spent nowadays rather courteously saying, no, I don't think so. And we really are not of the school of thinking that you must say, oh, that's a great idea, and whether it's a great idea or not, we want to be rather frank with each other. We're courteous, but we are frank. So we try not to waste our time on stuff that's not practical. But I'll give you an example. This is just a current example. There's a bass maker, a lutherer, someone who makes big stand-up basses and other stringed instruments, who contacted Penn saying, I could make you any kind of gimmicked bass you could ever possibly want. And so this afternoon at 3:00, we're going to talk about what we might be able to do with a gimmick bass. We don't know anything about what it is, but that would be one way that an idea would come. That some in this case, a prop maker who doesn't even know he's a prop maker, is an instrument maker, comes in with that sort of thought. It's a complete adventure all the time.
Sounds like a very exciting adventure. Looking back over your long career in magic, is there one thing that you'd wish that you'd done differently, or one thing that you wished you hadn't done?
Yes, there are almost an infinite number of things I wish I hadn't done. I mean, really, from particular performances to wrong things I've said to people, to we once spent about 2 years and $60,000 on a trick that was just a bad idea, and it took us. We originally designed it for outside. We couldn't get to shoot it outdoors. We decided we'd move it indoors onto our stage, but what it would involve is flooding the entire stage with water, that in a way that just wasn't practical. We tried to contain the water with plexiglass. It spoiled the effect of the trick. We used a very expensive and expert magic builder to help us out with this. He did his job beautifully, but in the end, the trick would have involved completely destroying our stage and drenching the front row of the audience. And it took us $60,000 worth of investment and 2 years to realize that. We are not lacking in persistence and perseverance. Perseverance is more often with us a sin than a virtue.
You seem to care deeply about the why in a trick. How can the magicians listening to this start to find the why in the material that they're doing?
Well, tell me what you mean by the why.
Oh, why are you doing this? Do you know what I mean? Like, why is the ball in the red ball? Why did you decide that the ball is rolling instead of floating? Why is the thing in a fish? Why?
The whys come from so many directions. I have a very close friend who hates magic, and he hates magic because he says, "Why would any magician want to do that? Why would somebody want to take two rings and link them together and take them apart and link them together and take them apart? What's the point of that?" Whereas, my friend uses the term the envy factor. When you go and see a performance, there's the envy factor. You want to be able to do what it is that the person on stage is doing. And the question that has haunted him for many years is, why indeed would someone want to do some of the stuff that you see magicians do? Why would you really want to take a threefold cardboard screen and pull out silk handkerchiefs? Why would anyone in the right mind want to do that? Now, sometimes the answer to that might be that the effect is beautiful, that when you look at it, it's enchanting. More often than not, however, it's what Al Baker used to call dragging out a line of baby clothes. So we certainly do think about whether the effect that we're going for is something that you would have some reason to want to do. Now, if you take the trick with the coins and the fish, there's two very strong things that you might want to do. I mean, you might very well want to be able to take handfuls of water and turn that into handfuls of money. mean, that's just a very pleasant wish fulfillment sort of situation. And you might very well want to be able to scoop up a handful of water and create life out of that. Those are two normal human wishes that get nicely combined in that particular routine. So there's the one question of, is it something you would actually like to do in real life? Could you, if you did this in real life, would you feel better for it? But then there are other things that one does that we do that I don't think the answer is I would do that because I wish to do that. Take an example. There's a trick that we do on stage live where Penn sings the teapot song. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. And I'm standing next to him and I'm doing the teapot gestures. And he picks me up by my elbow and pours a cup of tea out of me, right? So it gushes out of my hand. Now, I don't think people would really want to do that in real life, but I think it's a really funny idea. I mean, I think it's an idea that says, what if when you did the teapot song, there were actual consequences and you could actually spill tea by that means? So it's just an interesting idea, as opposed to the idea of you've got a little threefold screen and you're dragging out rumpled silks. There's nothing in that sings fun.
Sure. How important is method to you in your process?
It's essential, and method is often a huge stumbling block, because I know that there's a sort of movement among the art school magicians, where they're thinking, well, let's just think of the effect and then we'll be able to do it somehow. Well, no. Yeah, it's part of the grammar of what you expect of a magician is that the magician is going to do something that astounds you, that amazes you, and that seems to contradict the laws of the universe. That's part of what you expect, and in order to do that, the means of achieving that are very difficult. Think about it. We're in this totally weird art form. It's an art form in which you're your own writer. More often than not, you're your own director. Then you're your own performer, and then you're your own tech team. Now, yes, we have people who help us. Absolutely, we have a wonderful staff of our own. We have other people who have come in and advised and built for us. But essentially, as a magician, you're doing everything in show business all at once, and that's difficult. And one of the things that the bottom line is, you are required, sort of by definition, you're required to, at the core of all of this, do something that looks impossible, but you're somehow making it seem possible. Because that's where the joy of watching magic certainly is not that. The joy of watching magic is looking at something that can't be and saying, wow, it really seems to be. What's going on? It's not at all a comfortable form. I mean, this is not magic is not a form that you sit and you put up your feet and you lean back and it rolls over you. Magic is this very active form where you're watching intently, hoping that you will be deceived, right? You want to use all of your brain power and fail. Sure. It's a strange sort of form. One of the pieces of evidence that people watch magic actively is how bad mentalism often is. Because mentalism sometimes, when a mentalist doesn't say, this is really impossible, this is impossible, and yet it seems like I'm doing it, it's hard, if the mentalist says, well, this might sort of be possible, you don't get that same explosion of fun, that you get out of magic, where it's not possible, and now suddenly it seems to be. That's one of the things that makes mentalism kind of very difficult to do well. There are some wonderful mentalists out there, but I appreciate them even more for the fact that they are able to overcome that ambiguity.
What are some magic books that you think every magician should have read?
Well, I think everybody should have a tar bell. The formative ones for me were certainly Tarbell as a reference. And Tarbell is not always correct, but Tarbell will at least give you some orientation in something. Anything I learned about card magic as a youth was learned from The Royal Road to Card Magic by Hugard and Broe. And I spent an entire summer just learning everything right in sequence. What's beautiful about that book is that each chapter builds on the previous one. So if in the first chapter, you learn to shuffle a deck. In the second chapter, you learn to shuffle a deck and do a trick with that. And it builds consistently through the book. And so it's a sort of like an anticipation of the idea of a programmed course. One of the major books for me was Classic Secrets of Magic by Bruce Elliott. That's what got me on the track that eventually became my version of the Needles. It's kind of what got me onto the Miser's Dream to begin with. I don't know whether that's in print or it might be in paperback. Let me think. All the Al Baker books, which have also been assembled in one big fat book by Todd Carr, but all the Al Baker books are really good because Al Baker was very practical. I mean, he really worked in the real world at real parties in real places. When he did his cake and hat, he would sometimes be out on the road for a week, and his wife would bake him a week of cakes so that at the end of the week, the cakes would be a little bit stale, but they'd still be usable. So all of the Al Baker books, Al Baker Ways and Means. Just look up Al Baker. You'll see all the names of them. The two Stuart Kramer, Carl Germain books, which again Todd Carr has done a beautiful edition of on Germain, but they're still available individually. The Carl Germain books by Stuart Kramer are very important to me because of the way Germain, first of all, Germain's methods are really subtle. They're really complex. They do what Jim Steinmeier talks about. Jim Steinmeier frequently has said that magic, a magical method is not one thing. It is a stack of lies that are arranged so that they all add up to something that looks impossible. And pretty much all of Jim Steinmeier's work is informed by that really quite brilliant thinking, and they're very worth having around too. Let me think of the other thing. Oh, of course, the Bobo on coin magic, Modern Coin Magic by J.B. Bobo. That's a very thoroughly thumbed book in my library. And strangely, for somebody who doesn't care for mentalism, Corinda's 13 Steps to Mentalism is very, very good, not just as a mentalism book, but as a book about figuring out what is important in a trick and going for that by whatever means you have to go for it, which is a very useful bit of thinking to get in there. I think that's sort of my at the moment my litany of the 48-inch shelf of good books. I have the set of books that Fleming Books put out years ago, which is let me think of it, Sachs, Sleight of Hand,
right,
and so forth. Those four books are very interesting to see. The Modern Conjurer by C. Lang Neil is a great book. Mostly, I think, because it's so heavily illustrated with photographs of people of his period doing tricks. So you see, for example, Mademoiselle Patrice producing spring flowers and dropping them into a parasol, and you see Charles Bertram doing card tricks, and he captures in those photographs the gestures of these people, the character of the gesture that these people had. I'm just going to step back a little bit. So, with Bertram, you have this very courtly sort of presentation, and you can see in his body what that kind of presentation must be like. Probably other books will pop to mind as we chat.
We can add them in later. Who are some magicians that you'd wished from the past that you'd wished you'd had the ability to see perform?
I'd like to have seen David Devant in his prime. I bet David Devant was pretty magnetic in his prime. Let me see. I would love to have seen Jermaine. I would love to have seen Bosco, Bartolomeo Bosco. I'd like to have seen him do the cups and balls, outdoors in a park someplace. I would love to have seen Hofzinser, even though I'm not very much a parlor magician style person. I'd like to have seen how his style played out in that environment that he was in, because apparently he really captured the nuance of the time. I had the good fortune to, a couple of years ago, to be given an opportunity to go to Egypt, India, and China and see some of the street magic, or the traditional magic that you always read about, but that you always go, wait a minute, what's this? How is this going on? And that was an extremely illuminating experience for me. It's one of the ones. I mean, it was not comfortable, because Egypt, India, and China are not places that you would want to live. Boy, do they not know how to do traffic. Well, I mean, we were in China. We were on a bus in the middle of the winter that got hit by another bus and skidded off the highway. In India, we were in a bus where I swear the bus just barreled ahead, with absolutely no thought that there was anyone else on the highway, and pedestrians were screaming and running out of the way in front of the bus. And in India, the level of poverty is incomprehensible to a Westerner. Incomprehensible to have a skeletal woman come to your car holding a skeletal baby, making this gesture, meaning I need money for food. We see homeless people who are in terrible condition. They are in the lap of luxury compared to what we saw in India.
Sure.
But let me think if there's anybody else in the past that I'd love to have seen. I think I might have liked to have seen Harry Keller. Harry Keller. From what I read, Harry Keller was quite a presenter.
Let's move to now.
Yeah.
With Foolless, you've created unarguably the best platform for great magicians to be seen by as many people as possible. Was this your intention when you started the show?
It came out of a conversation that started with me saying to Penn, wouldn't it be interesting to do a show in which magicians invented tricks specifically to fool us? And I was picturing they would do espionage and find out what I was good at recognizing and what Penn was good at recognizing, and then we would follow them backstage creating the trick, and then that would eventually come to a performance, so that you would be on the side of the performing magician, knowing exactly how the trick worked, to see whether it could fool Penn and Teller or not. And when I described that to Penn, I don't think I did a very good job of describing it, because he misunderstood it to be what we actually have as the show, which is having magicians come on with this one chore, which is to fool us. Now, what is good in my mind about this is that the television is bristling with like the Got Talent type shows, in which incredibly unqualified judges watch people who have worked very hard on a work of art and judge them by absolutely random standards. So, you get, oh, he's so cute. You get, oh, she was so sexy in those moves. I really liked her. And it's just like, it's like being judged by completely unqualified idiots. I don't think that Penn and I are any smarter than those judges, but we've done ourselves the favor of giving us only one thing to do, which is not to say this act is good or this act is bad, but did it fool us or not? It is a concrete standard. And what this accomplishes is it overcomes a television audience's natural skepticism. There's a television audience which has, television audience has seen YouTube videos. And television audience knows that they're not seeing everything in a YouTube video. I think very few people are fooled into thinking that the musicians who just perform on supposedly on the street are actually people who would fool them in real life. This overcomes that by just saying, we are being frank with you. We are there really just like you. One of the things we're doing is trying to figure out what the trick is. And it's nice to have that very simple standard there when it is accompanied by the other things that we do, which is the only people who get to be on the show are really good, right? So it is a very, very good magic show. You know that if a magician comes out on stage, the magician is going to be a fine, fine entertainer. It allows the audience then to have the confidence that they're really watching this, and I think we set kind of an example. There is a tremendous amount that you see on television and in politics nowadays, in which people are rude to each other. It used to be that if you had a talk show on a political issue, it was a dignified debate. Now it's descended into depravity, where people, call each other schoolyard names, and interrupt each other constantly. The level of bad example that's being shown to us on television most of the time about how people should treat each other is horrific. And so one of the things that we are very conscientious about is we are polite and we are appreciative. And since everybody who comes on is good, there is always something very good we can say to that person. So the feeling of the game aspect of this is very much the gentle person's game, right? This is people. It's sort of like when sometimes when magicians come to see us live, they'll visit with us afterwards in our green room backstage, and we'll sit around and talk. And once in a while, one of them will say, "I have a little something that you might like to see," and they'll do something for us that will or won't fool us. But the whole aspect of it is very polite. It's friendly. It's polite. And part of the biggest message, I think, of the show to the viewer is that it is possible to talk to another person politely, even if you're describing how the magic trick is being done. We even do that with such discretion that no one ever feels like, oh, they just spoiled my whole career by giving away my trick. No, we do it in code, and we do it in a gentle and genteel way.
What do you think makes a perfect Foolless Act?
For me, a perfect Foolless Act is one in which I am completely gobsmacked. I mean, a perfect Foolless Act is one in which I go, I don't have a clue. Which I feel, deeply and totally amazed. There are some acts that sometimes win on our show because we don't have details about their methods, but that don't quite give me that feeling. But what I'm in quest of is the feeling that what I'm looking at, boy, I don't have a clue. I mean, it's just that impulse that got you into magic at the beginning, which is being fooled and going, that's what I'm looking for.
This might be like picking a favorite child, but are there some standout performances that you've seen on the show? Can you pick a couple and explain why they resonated with you?
Sure. Let me think. I've seen, there's so many acts. I mean, there's one act on this year that I won't tell you whether she fooled us or not, but I will tell you it is the greatest quick change act you've ever seen in your life, and it's an absolute miracle. I mean, you are watching what you always dreamed quick change would look like, and your jaw is on your chest all the time. When Helen Coughlin first came on the show, Helen Coughlin is an Australian, very straightforward, Aussie kind of, here you are, boys, can you figure out my trick? I absolutely love her all the time whenever she comes on. I've only figured out one thing that she ever brought us. She and her 90-something-year-old father come up with these extremely clever things, and her presentation is so sort of forthright. I loved being fooled by John Lovick, Handsome Jack, because he completely and utterly did a sucker gag on me. And he did a torn and restored paper in a way that looked exactly like the Chinese laundry ticket that I had bought when I was 6 years old. And he finishes it up, and then he just handed it to me and walked away. It was just there was a great joy in being that thoroughly suckered. Let me think. Oh, well, Paul Gertner is quite wonderful, and Paul Gertner also does all of those levels of subtle that allow a magician to go, oh, that's what he must be doing. Uh-oh, I don't have it now. So that's fun. I love the number. I mean, I pretty nearly every woman magician that we've had on the show has been very good, which is no surprise, because as with doctors, for years and years, magic was just a men's club, and so for a woman to have the stamina to withstand all of the prejudice that women have had to withstand in magic, I mean, that's already a great credit to the person's character. But lately, we've been seeing women who have been extraordinarily inventive and creative and personal, so that they're not really just repeating the kinds of things that men have done for years. There's the style of female magician who will come out, in a tailcoat and do card fans. That's okay, but that's not really bringing a woman's perspective into it. And particularly this year, again, you will see on the show some amazing women, some women who've just said, wait a minute, I'm a woman, I have things to work with that men don't have to work with.
Sure. Vanishing Inc's co-founders, Andy Gladwin and Josh Jay, have both appeared on Foolless and said the experience was amazing. I've interviewed many magicians on this show who have agreed with them. How did you set up the production side of things so you would make the magicians appearing on the show feel so comfortable?
Well, I can't take a lot of credit for that. For the first few years of the show, that was a lot of what made that work was the combination of Johnny Thompson. It was originally just Johnny Thompson, and then for a while Johnny Thompson and Mike Close, and now Johnny died, and Mike has taken over. Mike was the key person this last season. I mean, we want everyone who comes on to come off magnificently. So the magicians arrive and are warmly welcomed, and then are given time to rehearse on stage, very often longer than we get to rehearse on stage, with the assistance of somebody like Mike Close, who has a great sense of humor, and he not only knows, well, the trick will be more deceptive if you do this. Mike also will say, you need a joke here, and know to add that. So when magicians arrive, they're supported immediately. They're supported and encouraged by the people we have here, because everyone wants them to look good. I mean, in fact, I believe everyone in the entire crew wants them to fool us. That's the aspiration of everybody. I mean, kind of including us, is we really want people to come on and fool us. So there's this tremendous sense of support. Then, we really truly don't know who's going to be on the show ever. We're kept in a completely separate location. Sometimes people will even be in town who are good friends of ours, and they won't tell us they're in town, because it would give away the fact that that's what's going on. They're kept in a completely separate location from us, and then when they come out, there is a moment before the cameras roll where basically Penn and I both go, hi, thank you so much for coming, and really let them know that they're honored guests, and we're rooting for them. And then I think that kind of accounts for most of it. That we're treating them well. We're treating them as we would like to be treated.
Back to the thing you said about television not being a good example, you making it a good example. Where did the idea of you and Penn standing outside chatting to everybody after a show come from? And aren't you drained after a performance?
Well, I mean, it's something that I'm afraid won't last for very. Will not resume for some time. It began. I mean, we've always been in the midst of the crowd. We've never been people who sort of separated ourselves off with a velvet rope from the people who come to see the show. We don't, after a show, we don't hop into the limousine and fly away. When we first worked, the very first gigs that we got were street performance. You can't get away from the crowd there. They're part of the show. They are part of you. Then when we played small theaters, one of the first small theaters that we played, there was no stage door, right? You couldn't get out from backstage without walking right through the auditorium. So we started to end the shows by walking through the auditorium, just hanging out in the lobby. Now, why a performer would not do that is amazing to me. I mean, I guess I can understand if I'm Mick Jagger and I have 15,000 people in a stadium or 100,000 people in a stadium. I'm not going to have time, and I'm probably going to be treated somewhat roughly by people who have sort of idolized me from afar. We've never been that successful. If you're that successful, I can understand being a little more distant. But when you've only got an auditorium that's got, in our case, like 1,500 seats in it, if you're willing to hang out outside the theater for what is usually a half hour or 45 minutes, the amount of fun that is really hard to exaggerate. I'm meeting people from all over the world. B, I'm meeting people who have come to see the show, sometimes spending a lot more money than they'd spend on anything else. They really, really are happy to be there. C, there's generations of people now. We've been in business for so long. There's generations of people who come to the show. So I think the perfect moment for me was the moment when a guy came up to me and said, I want to tell you, when I was 7 years old, I was on stage. I was the kid on stage with Mofo the Psychic Gorilla. I still remember that. And I'd like to introduce you to my 7-year-old son.
Oh.
So why wouldn't you do that? If you could. But now when the pandemic first hit and we got word of it, people said, well, just don't shake hands and touch your face. Wash your hands before that. So we meticulously did that. But there was about a week of shows when the contagion was really spreading, when we were at risk and just didn't know it. Fortunately, at the end of the shooting of Fool Us, I mean, it's just fortunate that that we had scheduled Fool Us in such a way that it just skirted disaster. No one involved in Fool Us came down with any symptoms of anything. It was pure sheer luck.
After many years without publishing material for other magicians, what made you want to tackle something like Masterclass?
I was a school teacher for 6 years before I went into this line of work, and when you've been around for a while, sometimes you have stuff that's worthwhile to say. My own instinct is, while I'm doing material, that's not material that I want to publish yet. And certainly I think I would be remiss if sometime before I'm dead, we don't publish material that we are no longer using. And if we're so the disinclination to publish material is just that when you publish it, you're inviting other people to do it. And there are things that I would rather keep exclusive for now. Masterclass was an opportunity to take all of that experience that we'd had, and talk about the things that we'd learned in interesting ways. It was a great deal of fun, and the Masterclass organization really knows its way around that format, and they made it look very elegant. We shot the entire course in 3 or 4 days, long days, but then they took it away and they came back and they organized it beautifully. They took things that were by themselves not very satisfactory, but put in context, very useful. They should take. We can take credit for the knowledge, but they should take credit for the artfulness of that. And it was also, as it turns out, Johnny Thompson's last TV appearance, and it's wonderful. It's just wonderful that he was part of that.
For sure. Talking of mastery, can you talk a little about the T.S. Eliot quote that you like about every venture is a new beginning, a raid on the articulate?
A raid on the inarticulate.
Sorry, inarticulate.
With shabby equipment, always deteriorating. It's true that if you're going to do something new, you're always starting from zero. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes, especially if we have to produce a lot of material, we will adapt something. We will find a way of adapting an existing trick with a new idea. But I'm always resentful of magicians who say, "Oh, there are no new ideas in magic. It's all, they usually say it's all old wine in new bottles, but I would rather say it's all new wine in old bottles, as though they're just repackaging some lightweight idea in a way that looks very classy." But I resent people who say everything is just the same as the past. You've just got to do it again and again. And so I'm drawn to that T.S. Eliot quote in which he complains that after all the years he spent writing, every time he starts writing, it's starting with a blank page, and he has to come at it again, and he has to go through the same process again. Things don't get easier, really. You do get a little smarter about your choices, and you do learn a bit of process. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think when I was 20, I believed that I would, if I wanted to build a box trick, I would design it, build it, and it wouldn't work. And I'd be surprised and disappointed. Nowadays, if I wanted to build a box trick, I would get the idea for it. I'd whack together something in cardboard and see if anything about it could possibly work. If that was encouraging, we'd do another version in plywood and modify it down and do it step by step by step by step. Nothing that you think of ever comes out the way you envisioned it. You've got to test every little thing step by step by step by step. I'm doing that right now with one of the new things that we're creating. Last night, I was over at Tom Rubino's house. Tom Rubino is a brilliant magic builder in Las Vegas. Just brilliant. He's built several things for us before, and he's built things for Carbonaro and Matt Franco. He's built for a lot of people, and he really knows what he's doing. But he knows, just like I know, that you got to go step by step by step. So last night I spent an hour and a half in his kitchen because his workshop was too hot because we're in the middle of the desert. In his kitchen, and he had his little saber saw, and he had his measuring tapes and stuff. And we modified this and tried this and modified this and tried this for one beat in a big routine. That's the one thing I can say that you've got to understand if you're creating actual new stuff. It is going to take time. It's just the first idea that you get will not work. And that's just fine, because once you spend enough time with it, you will get better and better and better ideas. Part of what happens when, part of what is called practice. Practice isn't just repeating the same thing over and over again. that's stupid. That's pointless. Practice is doing something again and again and again, and each time getting better ideas and applying those better ideas one after the other after the other. And very frequently, when I'm sitting in my TV room, I will have a deck of cards with me because I'm still not happy with the way I control a card to the top of a deck. So I keep experimenting with, would this look more natural? Would this look more natural? Does this fit me? Is this comfortable for me? So that's when T.S. Eliot says that, I fully understand that, but I don't think of it as a negative. I think of it as you just need to know when you're starting on a new bit, the magnitude of what it is you're trying to do. And you also don't want to stop the first time you perform it. Johnny said to us, and I will never forget this, most magicians stop thinking too soon. You need to get it out in front of an audience. You need to work with it. You need to say, oh yeah, this would be so much better if I did this. And then you need to take it back and start again, and until you get to what you're trying to do, because we are in an extraordinarily difficult form. What we are doing must look perfectly impossible, absolutely perfectly impossible. That's a very, very high demand. I mean, magic is this sort of off-on switch. Either it's magic or it's crap. And it's ludicrous crap too. So it is really, really important to just keep continually improving it because it's such a difficult art form.
For those of us not lucky enough to have had a Johnny Thompson in our life to sit out the front and say, no, you should have done it like this and do it like that, what are some ways that people listening to this can go down that journey of improvement if they're just kind of on their own?
I think by not being on their own. I mean, I think you need, magic is a social form. You can't do magic in a vacuum. Maybe a violinist can play a beautiful piece of music for himself and get a certain satisfaction out of that. Magic is not that way. Magic is a communication. It's much like comedy in that it doesn't exist. Comedy doesn't exist unless there's an audience there to get the joke and laugh. So I think that one essential thing that magicians should do is utilize other people in partnership to watch what they're doing. I mean, there's so many levels at which people can be helpful. It's helpful just to have someone volunteer to watch what you're doing. It's helpful to have somebody who is skillful watching what you're doing and saying, you might try it. Have you thought about it this way? I say this is very much in the forefront of my mind, not only because Penn and I do this with each other all the time, constantly, and it's one of the reasons that we've been able to produce as much material as we have, but because the other night, I had done a little talk for Tannen's Magic Camp, and Matt Franco, fellow magician in town, wonderful performer, had been on the program also. He wrote me a little complimentary email and said, if I can ever be of use to you, let me know. And there was a problem that I was stuck on for a piece that Penn and I are working on. And I was just stuck on it. The way sometimes you just can't break loose. You go around in a circle and then around in a circle and around in a circle. And I wrote back to Matt, want to Zoom right now? And he went, okay. And he Zoomed. And I told him what the situation was. And we talked. And part of the answer came out of the fact that I have a bin of socks just around the corner there. And part of the answer came from Matt saying, you could end it with this. And suddenly it broke the logjam. And I said, Matt, do you have anything you're working on right now? And he said, well, actually, yeah, I got this routine that I'm working on. Do you have time to look at it? I said, sure. So I watched that. And afterwards we talked about it. And I think maybe we were able to do a little bit of a breakthrough to unstick him on the problem that he was dealing with. So I think appealing to other people and not being so damn terrified. Magicians are just they often are terrified. They're terrified of getting caught. Well, I'm afraid that part of getting good is getting caught. So, perform whatever it is that you're working on for somebody, whether they're an audience that's skilled or whether there's an audience that's unskilled. The conversation will help advance the art.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about lying without talking? I understood you first realized the power of this back in your college days with doing the razor blade swallowing.
It's a very interesting thing. I was a strong rebel against patter because I thought most of the time patter was awfully redundant. Here I have a ball, I'm putting it into my hand, and now it's gone. I mean, that's just flat. Why would you ever say those words? And yet a lot of people did. And I really just thought as an experiment, can I get the audience to tell themselves the story that I want them to tell themselves by putting evidence out here and letting them add this to that and come to a conclusion, which is, in our case, what we desire is a false but artistically beautiful conclusion. So that it started as that experiment. And as I did it, I discovered a kind of an extraordinary quality that not talking has. And that is, when you stop talking, people are forced to think and look and study what's going on. There is a level of intimacy that you get that you don't have when there are words between you. If I stop right now, suddenly the whole temperature of the room changes. It becomes intimate. It becomes really powerfully intimate. I noticed this very dramatically when I broke that rule when I was first working on the red ball trick, because that kind of trick had always been done to music. The musician that works with us, Mike Jones, wrote a great little composition to go with my routine, and the routine was not really hitting very well. And one night he had to have some emergency surgery. And I thought, well, I'll just do it to track. And then I tried doing that, and that was terrible. And I thought, let's just try doing it dead silent. And at that moment, the moment that the ball hit the floor, you could hear it. The moment that there was the slightest rustle of reaction from the audience, I could hear that. The conversation had resumed where the musical patter had been in the way. So I'm very interested in that experience, and you'll see that it weaves in and out. You don't want an entire show done that way, I don't think. I mean, I could conceive of it kind of working, but there is a great important place for speech, but it's got to be speech as interesting as the speech that Penn does. If you don't have that interest in that kind of language, maybe you should try not speaking. It might not work for you. It happened to work for me because something about the way I think, it's almost as if the audience can read my mind. I never act. I never really make faces. I never do, that sort of clown stuff. I just think the thoughts that I would think if the thing were really happening. And somehow or other, the audience seems to be able to read that on my body. And it's it's a weird experience. It's almost, if I believed in that sort of thing, it seems almost telepathic, in that they are really reading what I'm thinking. But I know they're reading what they're seeing.
For sure. We're nearly out of time. I just wanted to ask you really whether you've enjoyed this forced time off that we've all had at the moment. Has it been a welcome breather for you, or are you just antsy to get back to performing?
I miss performing very much. I have to say, but I'm also not somebody who spends a lot of time wailing over what he can't have. That doesn't seem to me very efficient. So I'm trying to do what I can to continue to exercise the artistic impulses that make me, without the nightly presence of an audience for however long this is going to be. I think that we're talking about a year or a year and a half. I'm 72 years old. A year and a half is this much time. in the course of that. I can learn to live with that, and I can learn to take advantage of that.
So what are you doing to scratch those artistic itches?
Well, primarily working on new material. I mean,
Right.
that is what we're doing. I'm also, I've been making the beginnings of write-ups of some of the Penn and Teller material, with the intention that by the time I'm ready to publish, I will have accumulated all of that stuff. Because I really would, I'd like not to pass out of this world without leaving some good gifts for people who are also in the art form. I mean, when I think about how much I learned from, like the great Robert Harbin book,
Mhm.
which I bought when it came out. And now Harbin is gone, but still, if you really want to understand the zigzag, don't watch people do it on TV. Read what Robert Harbin has to say about it, because you will really understand if you take advantage of the gift he left us. You will really understand why that trick is incredibly beautiful and powerful, and you won't get that out of some magician who puts it on wheels and dances around with it on
Mm.
stage and does it as a quick flash effect, because it's not that kind of piece of magic. It's a very deep fooler.
You've just excited every single person listening to this show with the talk of that book. Could you tell us anything more about where it's at, what your thoughts are?
Where it's at is I'm halfway through the first draft of a chapter on the needle trick. I have probably 5 pages of notes on shadows. Um, that's about where it is. It's this this long-term project that I have told myself, if you ever get time off, you'll do. It's very hard to do. I mean, writing is one of the loneliest, hardest things you can possibly do. But I'm hoping that, I mean, depending on how long the pandemic goes, we'll see how much of that gets done now.
Well, that's a very exciting bombshell to end the show on. Teller, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time this afternoon. I really, really appreciate it.
I do a lot of interviews here and there, and this is one of the nicest I've ever done, because your questions are not the obvious ones, and they're thoughtful and deep and worthwhile.
Thank you.
Thank you.